That Time I Got Reincarnated as a Slime, Volume 20. Prologue. Feldway. Immediately after his loss to Ludora, Feldway ordered Mai, whom he had kept on standby, just in case, to return to the Celestial Palace, their safe base. He was already there, his face contorted in humiliation as he shouted, still wearing his bloody vestments. "Ludora? Don't give me that nonsense," he snapped. "What kind of hero do you claim to be if you couldn't even protect Lord Veldenava?" Those were Feldway's true feelings on the matter, so enraged was he. He knew Ludora was decently strong, but he had never dreamed that he could be defeated by someone like that once he had castle guard. Never in a million years did he expect that the supposedly invincible castle guard could be broken, and even if he hadn't been his usual cautious self, that would have been more than enough reason to opt for a retreat. He knew there was no shame in fleeing, but he just couldn't contain the anger welling up inside him. As repulsive as this defeat was, it was still not a decisive one. Feldway repeated this to himself, attempting to regain his composure. He wanted to forget about his own loss, instead turning his attention to how the others were faring in battle. Then another unexpected truth shocked him all over again. "Sir Michael, have you taken care of the demon Lord Rimuru?" That demon lord was his biggest concern now. Feldway wasted no time sending a thought communication over to Michael, but there was no response. What's going on? Sharing the same skill, Michael and Feldway were essentially one and the same in body and soul. No matter how far apart they were, indeed, even if they were situated in wholly different dimensions, their two wills would never be separated. Such a separation would be possible only if one side was in a situation critical enough that there wasn't any time to respond to a call, but even then, Michael, unlike Feldway, had a mastery of parallel existence and therefore should have been able to revive himself from anything. So there wasn't that much reason to panic, or there shouldn't have been. But hearing no response whatsoever was unusual. If time is no longer stopped and operating like usual again, the battle should have been won long ago. There was no way the demon Lord Rimuru would know about their time suspension skills. The moment they used Leon to lure him onto the scene, the mission was already accomplished. And yet, Feldway's heart raced as an ominous premonition ran through his mind. And then the message arrived. "Ah, my wish has come true. My only regret, Feldway, is that I must leave you behind as I pass on." Michael sent the communication to Feldway with the last ounce of strength he could muster before he ceased to exist. Feldway could feel Michael's power within his own body, but his will was not there. And that meant just one thing: Michael was dead. No. Michael's a parallel existence. No matter what situation he's in, I know he can be revived as long as I'm safe. Feldway was distraught enough that he didn't even try to pretend nothing was amiss. Michael was the first friend he ever made. People like Zerario and Fen were one thing, but this was a friend of the heart, someone he wouldn't hesitate to bare his soul to. Cautious as he was, Feldway had always prioritized Michael's safety, layering plan after plan until he felt absolutely sure he'd be safe. But there was no sign of Michael coming back. Lord of Justice, Feldway's ultimate skill, hadn't disappeared, and Feldway could even feel his monas restoring itself. If he spoke to Michael, he'd receive a response, but there was no sense of self. All that remained was the power to control Michael, Lord of Justice, in its complete form. This wasn't Michael, Feldway's friend, who had hoped with his own free will that Veldenava could be revived. This was something fundamentally different. And with that, Feldway had to accept facts. His friend was gone forever. Why? How did this happen? He wondered out loud, but no one was there to answer him. The unbelievable truth of the event stunned him. Then he thought about Michael's last words. His wish had come true. What did that mean? Feldway had no idea, but at least he knew Michael's final moments weren't spent in pain. He had found meaning to his life after all, and that at least provided a little solace. At the same time, however, Feldway couldn't help but feel jealous. How is this fair? Having all the satisfaction to himself, then just leaving me behind. Feldway was alone. As head of the 7 primordial angels, he was in a position of leadership, his shoulders sagging with the weight of responsibility. Consulting someone else never occurred to him, so all decision-making was left to his own will. With Veldenava gone, there was no longer any escape from that pressure. But Feldway continued to stand at the forefront as a leader. He had to, if only so he wouldn't make anyone else uneasy. Since he was unilaterally making all these decisions, it was perhaps inevitable that he was largely walled off from his peers. Feldway never really cared what his companions and co-workers thought, which was a fault of his. Over the years, this had led to severe discord, and before Feldway could even realize it, the gears of the machine he oversaw began to fall out of alignment. By that point, the whole group was incohesive at best. Feldway remained unaware of this, for better or for worse. Fenn, his erstwhile conversational partner, counted as a friend, but not one trustworthy enough to reveal any weakness to. Thus, in the end, despite all the great big worlds out there, no one on any of them could truly understand Feldway enough to heal his mind. Then Michael appeared. In him, Feldway found a comrade who held the same goals in his heart, as well as a friend he could truly resonate with. Michael completed him, in a way, bringing a kind of joy Feldway had never experienced before. At some point, he became as important to Feldway as Veldenava. But reality was a cruel thing. This friend he finally acquired, one he felt completely at ease with, had vanished, leaving him behind. What should I do? For the first time in his life, Feldway felt weak. Hey, boss, quit actin' so damn weepy and tell me what I should do next. Temporally speaking, it was over in the blink of an eye, but it was true that Feldway found himself stunned. However, Vega, not exactly known for caring about other people's feelings, paid this no attention when he spoke to him. There was another person, my Foki, but she remained silent as usual as she watched them. Only Vega was as indifferent as ever, and Feldway looked at him, offended. Silence, Feldway spat. I just lost contact with Michael. Understand that I have no interest in dealing with you right now. He hoped this statement would quiet Vega. But Vega was never good at reading people. Huh? After all that arrogant crap he spouted, Michael lost? Man, that's pathetic. It was beyond reckless of him to say. It was also more than enough to make Feldway snap. I told you to be silent, he shouted before launching a harsh, aggressive shot of his aura at Vega. Damn. That's crazy. The yawning gap between Feldway's and Vega's strength was like the distance between heaven and earth, it could never be bridged. But even though he knew that, Vega refused to keep his mouth shut. Whoa, boss. Are you saying I'm wrong or something? It's about survival of the fittest in this world, ain't it? All that talk about justice and blah, blah, blah doesn't mean crap if you die. Prove me wrong. The words themselves were intensely incendiary, but that was what Vega really felt, the credo behind every action he took. It was a sound argument, in a way, and also the supreme truth. Regardless, Feldway wasn't about to agree with him. Someone like you should never dare to utter Sir Michael's name. Feldway took a swipe at Vega, hoping to cut off his words that way. But not even that silenced him. Hey, what are you talking about? Look, you didn't give a damn when that guy Cornu died, and you sat by and looked the other way when I ate Aurelia and Arius, yeah? And that's because you thought I was doing the right thing, didn't you? Didn't you? He was correct, the news of Cornu's death didn't sadden Feldway at all. The failure of his mission had displeased him, but he was too busy thinking about a plan B to dwell on the matter much. That was how he acted toward some of his oldest colleagues, too, and Aurelia and Arius were just pawns on the chessboard to him. Nothing about them mattered at all to him. If Vega ate them, well, it'd help him get stronger, at least, that was the almost machine-like response Feldway had to it. He didn't blame Vega at all for doing that, in fact, he thought it was probably the best thing for his own power. Tisk. You and your big mouth, he muttered. He. That's just how I am. Having his mind so clearly read unnerved Feldway a little. So he intimidated Viga some more, hoping he wouldn't notice. What would someone like you understand? We have a higher purpose, you know, and we're willing to sacrifice anything to achieve it. Shut up, Viga said, defiantly interrupting Feldway. You're sounding like a spoiled brat. The pressure around them was so intense that it felt like the space itself was being compressed. It'd be impossible to resist an authority like this, usually, but Viga kept going, furious. Besides, everyone knows it's a cruel world we live in. Viga had grown up in a harsh environment, so he knew just how cruel the world was. Feldway found himself falling silent, allowing Viga to speak. Yuki, my old boss, was trying to resist all that cruelty, you know. Looking back, I'm kind of amazed he got that far with what little power he had. But I still believed in that guy. I was all ready to kill him in his sleep if he showed me any weakness, but Yuki was kinda tricky that way. You saw how he was pretending to be controlled, for example. So what? Yuki's gone too now, isn't he? Yeah, he is. Not even he could do it. When you're faced with such a huge gap in force, it's hopeless, no matter how idealistic or righteous you are. When he heard Yuki's mind was being controlled, Viga was looking forward to making fun of him to his face. But somewhere in his mind, he also saw Yuki as dangerous. He wrote that off as a habit ingrained over the course of his life, but perhaps his instincts were telling him Yuki was of sound mind after all. It was a good thing, Viga thought, that he didn't fully join the bandwagon with him, but when he learned Jahil had killed him, he couldn't help but sigh. Nothing was ever permanent in this world. Any world where we can be happy, he told Feldway, is just an illusion, really. We gotta be more honest with ourselves, you know. Honest? Sure. If survival of the fittest is the unbendable truth we live under, all we have to do is make sure we're standing on top. Might makes right, Viga reaffirmed to himself. No matter how flowery your words, they meant nothing if you couldn't back them up with action. On the other hand, if you could make what you want happen, you were free to do whatever the hell you liked. As long as you didn't lose, you were good, and no matter how fiendish the act was, if nobody could take you down, it meant justice was on your side. No matter how much of a natural-born coward you were, if you survived to the end, you won. That was how Viga lived his life. From that point of view, Michael, now defeated, no longer had any worth. Yet here was Feldway, someone far stronger, mourning this loser. It made little sense. Look, boss, you're a powerful guy, Viga said. Jahil got Yuki, even, but he couldn't compare with you. That girl Velzad's a monster, too, but I still think you could beat her, to say nothing of that Michael guy. So as far as I'm concerned, you're my boss now, okay? And I'm sure no one's gonna complain about that. As strong as Feldway was, that was a foregone conclusion. Viga didn't hesitate to make that clear. You're such a simple man, aren't you? Feldway told him. Hey, buttering me up ain't gonna earn you anything. That wasn't a compliment, Feldway thought with a sigh. But he could also tell the grief of losing Michael was starting to fade a bit. Maybe this was Viga's way of consoling him, he couldn't help but think so. Power, huh? As far as that goes, at least, we didn't lose much of it, Feldway mused. Michael was lost, but his power had returned to Feldway. Some of it had vanished for good, but Michael had used the last bit of his strength to entrust that power to him. That, above all, proved just how much he cared about Feldway, and if so, there was no way Feldway would let it go to waste. It might not be right to steal a friend's power the way Viga had, but what Feldway just did was pretty much the same thing. He had no intention of criticizing Viga to begin with, but just then, Feldway began to feel a sort of kinship with him. All right. From now on, I will serve as your king in place of Sir Michael. I swear to all my subjects that I will defend the throne until Lord Veldenava is revived. Once Feldway was resolved to that, it was time to take action. He had always lived under Michael's thumb. He had kept his true form hidden from view because of that, but now there was no more reason to hold back. It was time to unleash everything he had in his true body, kept hidden in another world, so he could fully leverage the power Michael left him. "It has been a long time since I revealed my true form to anyone," he said. Feldway was the first servant Veldenava created, and as such, he looked very much like his creator. While Veldenava had long, jet-black hair infused with the shining radiance of the stars, like the cosmos, Feldway's was long and silvery white, like light shining down from above. His almond-shaped eyes shone like blue stars, lending him a look that was more divine than strictly beautiful. In those eyes now was a determined will of steel. His old self, a bit like a doll or the creation of someone else, seemed laughable by comparison. The way he could be seen as either male or female was unchanged from before, but that was because he was simply too beautiful for words. This beauty was framed by his tremendous physical presence. All the powers Michael had collected now belonged to Feldway. The Monus Michael had authority over contained 4 angelic ultimate skills. The sole ones beyond his grasp were Raphael, Lord of Wisdom, Uriel, Lord of Vows, and Sariel, Lord of Hope, and all skills associated with them were fully accessible to Feldway. Not only that, the factors of 2 true dragons, Velzard and Vielgrind, were infused in his body. In terms of fighting force, Feldway had never been better equipped. "Dang. You really are a monster," Vega gasped a bit as he softly spoke. He couldn't keep the truth from escaping his lips. That was how much of an aura Feldway was emitting. It was like a completely different person. "Vega, I am now awakened, thanks to you," Feldway said. "I appreciate the favor." "Hair. Don't worry about it," Vega laughed, a little embarrassed. But he quickly regained his composure and went back to his usual brazen look. "But don't forget, okay? I always got my sights on you. I'll do your bidding now 'cause I know I can't take you, but if you show me any weakness, I'm gonna grab ya." Vega may have said that only to hide his embarrassment, but he meant every word of it, too. Feldway understood that well, but he still happily nodded at it. "Hair. I'll look forward to that." His smile had a heart-stopping dread to it now, like nothing he had shown before. Chapter 1. The first of the final. In the former Eurasania, on the planned site of the demon Lord Milim's new city, 2 people were dancing close to the brink of death. Esprit was one of them, the other, her adversary, was Period the Antlion. "Honestly, it's not really in my character to fight so much for real like this," thought Esprit. The battle had grown desperate enough that Esprit wanted to complain to someone about it. Period could nullify all magic, which made her about the worst opponent possible for the demon. Even nuclear cannon, fired at point-blank range when all else failed, was deflected like it was nothing. The prism barrier that surrounded Period let her reflect any kind of magic, and not just that. It also worked against any skill that involved emitting beams or rays, to some extent. That made Period a natural enemy to any demon that fought with magic. Esprit was having trouble buying more time for this battle. Her lack of strength peeved her deeply. Then some unexpected assistance arrived. "Let me help you out." It was Phobio, who had given Sufia command of his squad so he could join Esprit. Normally he should be supporting Sufia, his commanding officer, but every member of the Flying Beastly Knights was a warrior of their own. They didn't need orders to make the right moves, and every unit showed extraordinary cohesion in battle. If both their commander and vice-commander were fighting on the front lines, that'd be a far greater shot of morale than if they stuck to the rear guard. Phobio was stepping up first this time, lest Sufia steal all the glory yet again. "Ah, you can tell this one's bad news, right?" Esprit asked him. "Yeah, kind of," Phobio replied. "But I'd have a better shot against her than you, wouldn't I?" He was right. Esprit, gifted as she was at fighting with magic, couldn't do a thing against this foe, but Phobio was more the close-range, blood and gut sort. Magic might not work on Period, but with Phobio, at least there was still a chance he could figure something out. "Yeah, maybe," Esprit said. "I guess I'll join in, too, and fight with this." She had planned to break it out at some point, but Esprit chose that moment to unsheath her magic sword, her main hope for victory. With her packing a blade and Phobio in his most powerful half-beast form, it was now a pair against the bewitchingly beautiful Period. But even with 2 against 1, they were at an overwhelming disadvantage. Esprit approached and swung her sword. It was a masterful stroke. It was hard to believe she had been an amateur until not long ago. She had begun learning the sword as a pastime more than anything else, but when Esprit dove into something, she tended to go overboard with it. She'd go through her reps over and over again whenever she had a spare moment, repeating the forms and stances Ajira had shown her. It had granted a certain sharpness to her skills in a remarkably short time, but regrettably, Period was far beyond her. Tisk. A fake, eh? Esprit remarked. One detailed enough to be indiscernible from the real thing. The moment she thought her slash would hit home, Period's body burst into a cloud of light particles and dissolved. Esprit thought it was an afterimage of the real thing at first, but she quickly realized she was mistaken. The next moment, that fake split up into multiple periods. Each was impossible to distinguish from the real one, even with Esprit's keen sense. This is impossible, she thought. She had hoped to aid Carrera in some small way, but even buying a little time for her would be asking a lot. Phobio was helping out for the time being, but any help he could give was just a drop in the bucket. He's better than nothing, I guess. It wasn't a matter of things somehow working out just because they outnumbered her. That was how beyond the norm Period's strength was. Just as they expected, Esprit and Phobio were attacked from all sides. There was no way to tell which Period was the real one, so all they could do was defend themselves from the onslaught. Esprit, by nature, tended to always look out for number 1, that is, herself, so she didn't try anything unnecessary. She had given up on this fight, ready to press the proverbial reset button on this video game. But death was out of the question. I think I could revive myself if I died, but dying means I'm not following Sir Raimuru's orders. Lady Carrera would be beyond upset, too, and I don't think I could ever forgive myself, either. So there would be no dying that day. But that didn't mean she had some surefire way of escaping the front lines. Simply put, she was a cornered rat. Thanks to these self-contradictory thoughts, Esprit was visibly slowing down. Period didn't miss this, of course, her poisoned fangs taking aim at. Don't just stand there. Esprit was kicked away by Phobio. Immediately afterward, poison-laced scales fired by Period rained down on the spot where Esprit had stood. They glowed with a beautiful, almost otherworldly radiance, but the poison inside was deadly enough to kill even demons. Its toxins corroded physical bodies and destroyed the spirit inside. Even Esprit, a Count-class demon peer, couldn't take this level of harm. Ow, she said. Sheesh. Also, thanks. Sure, Phobio said, acknowledging Esprit's casual appreciation as he resumed the attack on Period. He sent countless clones of himself across the field, lunging at his opponent with seemingly extraneous claw attacks. It seemed pretty pointless if Phobio didn't know who the real Period was, but he wasn't about to give up on this simple, straightforward approach. You know, Esprit suddenly said, you're weaker than me, right? Why don't you just give up? She knew this was a pointless question, so she didn't expect an answer from him. But Phobio flashed a bold smile back at her. Wow, that's rude, he replied. But fine. As long as I'm still alive, I win. Like Geld said once, as long as you survive and win next time, there's no problem to speak of, and if so, now's the time to gather clues for that next fight. That's what I'm working on. And yeah, I'm weak. I hate to admit that, but I just gotta do what I can. Esprit was impressed with the surprisingly serious answer. She agreed with it, too. I'm a bit of a sore loser myself, but I gotta say, I'm impressed with you, she said. Guess you deserve to be called the Black Leopard Fang after all. Thank you, Lady Esprit. You can be more casual with me than that, you know. A mistake along those lines led me to ruin once, but now's not the time to talk about that. Phobio, unlike Esprit, was taking this battle seriously. Even if he stood no chance of winning, He kept viciously attacking period, never retreating for a moment. He had become a wind of the darkest black, tearing through all period's doppelgangers, but still to no real effect. But then, perhaps finding this whole act annoying, period struck back for the first time. Her scales swirled in the air, then advanced upon Phobio like a drill. Even those little scale fragments could be a deadly weapon when gathered together. If Phobio took a direct hit, he'd be nothing but ground meat, and he knew that most of all. The difference in strength was obvious. Really, trying to face period was nothing short of suicide. But he had made the same decision as Esprit. If he didn't put in a full effort, it'd all but guarantee Carrera's defeat. Reckless or not, I gotta do it. If I can divert her attention even a little bit, my life is a small price to pay for that. Phobio was proud to be one of the 3 lycanthropeers. Part of him did want to flee, but that would mean losing Carillion's trust and betraying all the troops who looked up to him. That, in his mind, could never be allowed to happen, and that was what motivated him. His preferred fighting style involved using his high mobility to toy with his enemies before finishing them off with his sharp claw slashes. He didn't have particularly great defense, but given his specialization in speed, it wasn't that much of a problem. That speed was about the only thing keeping him alive, and even then only barely. The slightest lapse in concentration would result in his death. It was a pretty dangerous tightrope to walk. Esprit, looking at him, found herself re-evaluating her battle ally. Who was it? Gobwa? The girl who serves under Sir Benimaru. Isn't this Phobio guy constantly babbling at me about how much he loves her? I guess he can perform when it counts, though. Even though he's just this puny human, not like a demon, who can resurrect itself whenever it dies. From her point of view, even Phobio, who had become quite powerful among the higher-level magic-born, was just a puny human being. Esprit, after all, was an elite among elites, a great demon who served Carrera, one of the rulers of the demon realm. For her, death wasn't a finality. She could just come right back, like continuing after losing all your lives, so she never felt particularly endangered by anything. Depending on how bad the damage was, she might have to sleep for a few centuries, but for a demon with eternal life, that would pass in the blink of an eye. To her, then, the sight of those trying their hardest to survive within their relatively limited time was somewhat dazzling. What about her, though? Whenever she ran into something she couldn't handle, she could just turn to her master Carrera and she'd work something out. Any minor annoyances in her life could be safely shunted to her colleague Ajira. Up until then, Esprit really never had to deal with staking everything she had on something. Wait a minute. Could I actually be less useful than Phobio here? No. Something deep within Esprit screamed out that it was impossible. Maybe it was that genuine part of her, one she had almost forgotten about, that absolutely hated to lose. As if to prove it, Esprit stood back up, a strong figure after almost throwing in the towel a moment ago. Not because dying would violate her orders or for some other backward-looking reason. She just wanted to win, and her will was clear in her eyes. And what's more? Let's be frank, we can't beat this person, right? Instead, Phobio, why don't we just give her as hard a time as we can? Esprit was as much a mercenary as she was a realist. She wasn't going to entertain reckless dreams of making a comeback. Coldly and calmly, she was formulating the conditions required for a tactical victory. Hare, got any bright ideas? Phobio asked with a laugh. He sensed a change in Esprit's mood. Now he could feel that their chances of winning had gone from 0 to something better. Well, we can't win with a traditional approach, she said. But I have a little secret trick I could use. Would you like to forge a demon pact with me? As Esprit spoke, bits of scale were whizzing past Phobio, his entire body sporting an ever-growing number of light cuts. It was only a matter of time before the poison took hold, meaning that Phobio's tenuous grasp on life would soon fade away. But despite that, Phobio smiled. Another pact, huh? Well, no time to ponder it. Let's do it. What kind of demon pact are we talking about? Fabio had gone through the bitter experience of forging a pact with Footman and his cohorts, only to be tricked in the end, but he was going through with this anyway, a sign of just how resigned he was to his fate. "Oh," Esprit casually replied, "just your typical one. I will grant you any wish, and in return I ask for your soul, that kind of thing." The classic sort demons used to bring humans to their doom. As demons more or less lived off human souls, they were pretty good at forging contracts like that. With the magic they controlled, they really could fulfill most wishes. This wasn't as true for newborn demons, however. Only the oldest of the old, those around since ancient times, had that kind of power. For someone like Esprit, it was a quick little trick she could pull off without breaking a sweat. "Gotcha. I trust you, Esprit, so count me in." Fabio readily agreed, not so much as wincing even as his right arm was being crushed to pieces. Esprit smiled. "Good. If you hesitated at all, it might have been too late." Even before she heard Fabio's answer, she had already begun making preparations. "I know what you'll wish for, but the power to get through this." With a broad nod, Esprit activated the demon pact to make Fabio's wish come true. In exchange, a pathway to Fabio's soul opened up, allowing Esprit to enter. After just a moment of hesitation, she shed her physical body, as if shrugging off all her indecision, and then, back to her usual shape as a spiritual life form, she entered his soul. This was possess, a skill intrinsic to the demon races. It was used for things like taking over the body of someone they forged pacts with, and that was close to what was happening with Esprit and Fabio. "I really didn't want to take this measure, you know. It's such a wonderful body so Rimuru granted me, and now I have to leave it in the middle of a battlefield like this." "Whoa, what's going on here? Calm down. We're smack dab in the middle of a lethal situation, but I'm using ultra-speed thought to extend time 1,000,000 times over." Esprit's calm voice gave Fabio the mental fortitude to understand what was going on. Indeed, the world seemed completely stopped to him, frozen in time. "Huh. So this is what life looks like from the top of the heap. Oh, I still have quite a while to go, trust me. Lady Carrera can slow it down 100 million or so times over. She can instantly launch ritual magic that normally takes years to prepare." "Ha ha. I'm impressed." Impressed wasn't the half of it. This was on a whole other dimension, a realm Fabio couldn't begin to comprehend. Ignoring her dumbfounded companion, Esprit began to explain matters. "We have time now, sort of, so listen closely. I have exited my own body and returned to my spiritual life form base in order to inhabit you. Normally, I'd completely take over my host and use their power as my own, but that's kind of a whole multi-step process, and honestly, doing that won't make me much stronger at all." Fabio's wheelhouse was physical combat, especially close-range melee combat. The training Midray pounded into him had greatly improved those skills as well. Esprit, on the other hand, had just recently taken up swordsmanship as a hobby. Period was a magic specialist, too, so Esprit could land a few hits on her, but Period had adapted to her so well that defeat was imminent. That was one reason why Esprit preferred to have Fabio retain control over his body. But that didn't mean she'd be an idle observer. "The reason I'm inhabiting you is so we can combine our forces." "What's that mean?" "Just keep focusing on evasive measures for me. The way it was before, you would have been killed within 10, no, 5 minutes, but now that my power's integrated with yours." Esprit had used a demon pact to occupy Fabio's body. Now she was giving all her power to him. "So if I use that power, I can beat her?" Fabio's instincts told him it couldn't be that simple. And he was right. "It'll take more than just that. I think she's got even more of a vision in this fight than I do." Period's compound eyes gave her visual access to all kinds of information. She could clearly see the flow of magicules around her, which allowed her to instantly react to any sort of magic cast. That much was obvious when she threw Carrera's Abyss Annihilation back at her on the very first try. It proved to Esprit that Period was even more adept at handling magic than her. Esprit was probably outclassed in hasten thought, too. So what'll I do, then? Just keep struggling. Do everything you can to stay alive. And you won't be alone, of course. I'll help you. Phobio would be the one calling the shots during melee combat, but Esprit was going to engage in a little magical warfare, too. She knew it wasn't going to work, but the idea was it'd help mitigate attacks on Phobio. Okay. So you'll try to boost my chances of survival as much as possible? Exactly. For us, a tactical victory means we survive until someone comes along who can beat her. If we can also keep her attention and prevent her from interfering with Lady Carrera, I'll have nothing to complain about, Phobio agreed. It seemed sound to him. So we're buying time, in other words. It's about the only choice we have, isn't it? Given the clear difference in ability, I don't see us doing much of anything else. But don't worry. According to my calculations, we should be able to hold out for 20 minutes this way. Yeah, great to hear. Phobio chuckled at this. How was he not supposed to worry? He quickly banished the thought, however. It pained Phobio to admit it, but he was a pushover. But the weak have their own way of fighting, and Phobio was ready to do his best. The battle plunged into its second round. With Phobio and Esprit occupying the same body, their existence points added up to a sum that was more powerful than its parts. It was still under 1 million, which was nothing compared with periods, but Phobio was moving much better than before, letting him somehow find a way to keep up with his foe. One reason for that was because Phobio no longer had to worry about physical injury, not with Esprit taking the damage for him. Fatigue wasn't a concern anymore, either. It helped him clear his mind of worry and go into full-throttle battle mode, giving up on making this a prolonged fight entirely. This approach usually came with a pretty short time limit, but it was working only because Esprit was providing the magic force to keep it going. Phobio's animalize skill worked in 3 stages. The first was his usual magic-born form, the most well-balanced, least draining type. The second was his leopard-headed magic-born form, geared for battle and quite versatile. Finally, there was a fully animalized form capable of tricky, unpredictable moves. This form was the best in terms of pure speed, but Phobio couldn't use most of his sharply honed skills with it, so it wasn't well suited for humanoid enemies. Right now, Phobio was in his most powerful leopard-headed form. It drained him quickly, even damaging his body when he went all out like that. He had been carefully controlling his power, releasing it in quick little spurts. Even when he took damage, his lycanthrope body's natural regenerative ability let him manage that well enough. Maintaining that form consumed physical and magical force, which was a disadvantage in extended fighting. Now, however, he could put all those concerns aside and just keep on fighting. The hand he had lost a moment before was wholly rebuilt and ready to be used to its fullest. That was all thanks to Esprit. Phobio's soul was fully protected with Esprit incorporating her own spiritual body into it. That was made possible by her unique skill observer. Using it, she could keep a connection with people she knew that transcended time and space, and combined with the demon pact, she could take control of their souls in an even more complete fashion than before. It meant Esprit would take a lot of damage, but she wasn't about to complain. She tapped into everything that made her a demon, enduring the barrage in any way possible. But if you're hurting, well, you're hurting. I really hate insects, Esprit grumbled, these attacks that hit directly on your psyche. It makes having cancel pain meaningless. It was the combination of many little factors like these that gave insectors an advantage over demons. It was always a terrible mismatch. If a demon and an insector of equal strength fought each other, the insector would always win. These unfavorable conditions were conspiring to make Esprit's damage build up in no time. Phobio, however, was still fine. Thanks to Esprit's sacrifices, the fight remained competitive. And some good news was arriving. I knew it, Esprit said. I've just figured out why we're holding out better than I thought. Oh? Phobio replied. You don't have to react to this, Esprit muttered, but despite her gifts, It looks like Period was hurt pretty bad by Lady Carrera's magic. I had a hunch deflecting that huge spell had to come with risk, and I was right. Carrera's abyss annihilation had the power to destroy an entire planet, depending on how you used it. Period had taken that blow with her entire body, so Esprit assumed it must have had some effect on her. She couldn't prove that hunch by herself, but possessing Phobio and revving up her observer skill to maximum finally convinced her it was true. So if I attack whatever part of her is damaged, can I win this? No way. The damage is slowing her attacks, but her defense is still an iron wall. But think of it the opposite way. This is good for us, isn't it? Phobio fell silent for a moment. Then he heaved a heavy sigh. So I still have to dodge her attacks until help arrives? It was a sad conclusion, one he hated to make, but it was the only one he could reach. So, resigning himself to his fate, Phobio focused on Period's moves, trying to execute his role as best he could. Around 40 minutes later. We're sure putting up a fight, aren't we? Phobio asked Esprit. I'm too tired to talk. I can't go on. I'm so dead. Phobio was cut and wounded from head to toe, but he was alive. Esprit, protecting his soul and taking the damage, was also just barely conscious. They had assumed that 20 minutes would be the best they could do, so for her, this was a tremendously satisfying result, but that result came only after they gave it everything they had. Period, meanwhile, was doing just fine. If anything, she was moving better than at the start of the fight, which meant she had healed whatever damage Carrera had given her. Strategically, this was a great victory, but tactically, it was clearly a defeat. But that was okay. Both Phobio and Esprit, after all, had done their parts. Tisk. Just after I get a girlfriend, too. I couldn't regret this more if I tried. Oh? Was that why you were fighting harder than I expected? Well, congrats on exceeding my expectations, then. I'll take a message to her for you as a reward. If they couldn't get back up on their feet, all that remained was to wait for death. Knowing this, they began to exchange banter with each other. Phobio would have preferred to indulge in memories of Gobwa, the first real romantic partner he ever had, but Esprit wouldn't let him. What kind of monster are you? He asked. Not a monster, she retorted, a demon, remember. Oh, right. I guess sarcasm doesn't work on you, huh? Sad. Well, I appreciate the compliment, at least. I wasn't complimenting you. No? No, probably not. Through the intense battle, the two of them had grown close enough to talk this casually with each other. So they waited for the moment to come, distracting themselves as much as possible from the fear of death and the humiliation of defeat. However, Period held out her hand, her expression unchanging. Carrera had crushed the organ within her body that generated her magic, but now it was repaired, making her casting even more efficient than before. It would only take a moment to dispose of Phobio, who was lying motionless on the ground. She joyfully awaited the screams of death Phobio would soon belt out, not knowing he and Esprit were slowing down time to prolong their bantering. There wasn't a shred of respect for this opponent who caused her so much trouble. She was there simply to pursue the pleasure her instincts demanded. From Period's fingertips, a ray of dense, compressed magic shot out. It dug deep into the ground, not piercing Phobio. A hobgoblin had jumped out from Phobio's shadow, grabbing his leg and throwing him out of danger with the momentum. Then. Oof. Boy, I showed up with the best timing ever, didn't I? The dim-witted sounding voice echoed across the field. It belonged, of course, to Gobta. He had rushed in to help Phobio out of this critical situation, and he was ready to make his moves. And Gobta wasn't alone, either. As Phobio flew through the air, he was caught by Gobwa, a beautiful red-haired woman in a scarlet military uniform. She held Phobio firmly to her chest as she brought him out of Period's line of fire. Awesome. Phobio thought, though he didn't say it out loud. Ranga, who was the last to appear, stood up front to protect Gobta, providing a blockade against any follow-up move period might try. Without hesitation, he launched Apocalypse Howling, which slowed the Insector's movements. With those quick, keen movements, Phobio, along with Esprit inside him, was saved from almost wholly assured doom. Esprit, back in the body she had abandoned, sat up. "You've amazed me again, Sir Gobta," she said. "I always believed you'd come rescue me." Those gleaming eyes of hers weren't ridiculing Gobta, she really was a fan of him. "Oh? You were, huh?" he asked. "Wow. I dunno what to say. Now come on and show her exactly why you're part of the Big Four." Esprit couldn't stop piling on the praise. And none of it was trolling, either. She meant every word. "Well, maybe once this fight's over, we could go on a date." But just when Gobta began to get carried away. "Oh, I'm not looking, thanks," Esprit said. She didn't have any romantic sort of love for him, a fact she felt prudent to make clear. This made Gobta visibly disappointed, with shoulders sagging and everything, even as Esprit made good her retreat. So thanks to Phobio and Esprit's hard work, the front line had yet to collapse, and after that timely substitution, the battle was in its third round. A few moments before the great battle got underway, the battlefield had been cordoned off by a barrier. The greatest of the great would fight each other in this zone, and those of lesser ability would be pulverized into ash if they so much as approached the site. Above the battlefield, the one-on-one fight between Milim, one of Frey's own Big Four, and Tauren had grown so intense, no one could do a thing to stop them. The aerial battle between these two champions was proceeding faster than the speed of sound, leaving the Heaven Flyers and the Milim Guard with no choice but to step back so they didn't get caught up in it. The same was true for the flying insectoids serving under Tauren. They had scattered as well, their formation falling into disarray. The sky battle was thus left for these two titans to settle, but that would soon prove a terrible mistake. An overhead view of the battle would make it plainly obvious that one side's forces were starting to dwindle in number. "You are weak. Only good at fleeing," said Tauren. Frey was on the offensive at first. But after her signature claw strikes kept being evaded, she found herself defending instead. She did successfully attack a few times, but none of those strikes meant much to Tauren. They posed no threat to him. If this was Frey's full effort, he felt assured that this foe offered no challenge at all apart from her speed. Of course, that didn't mean Tauren would let his guard down around her, which was one reason why this battle was dragging on for so long, but he was starting to think it was time to end it. That was why he made that remark, but Frey merely laughed it off. "Oh, is that how you see it? I'll have to thank you, then." "What?" Tauren tilted his head, unsure of what she meant. Frey clearly was the cornered one, but for some reason, she had a breezy smile on her face. "Thank you for being such a fool, that is." "What did you say? What do you think is the most important element in battle, "Speed, you're right on that count, actually. But..." Frey agreed with him, speed was the most important factor. At the same time, though, there was something even more vital to remember. Something based not on physical ability, but on intellect. In other words, the way someone fought. When two fighters at the same level clash with each other, the outcome is greatly affected by whether they consciously think about their battle approach. The status of this battle proved that well. From the moment her first strike was dodged, Frey knew this would be an extended battle. She thought it key to sap her enemy's stamina without burning through her own along the way, so she took an approach that maximized efficiency. The tactic was adopted not only by her, but all the troops under her. She was working to give her side an advantage, in other words, by getting the enemy forces torn up in the shock waves from her and Tauren's battle. Using the power of someone like Tauren to drive his own allies to destruction was an innovative, intelligent move from Frey. This was indeed the true nature of the sly, crafty Sky Queen. The smile on her face finally made Tauren realize what was happening. "What? You aimed for this from the start?" "Did I? Well, who can say? Cocky little. But as long as you can't even scratch me, I will win the day. The enraged Tauren turned up the speed once more, advancing upon Frey. But that, too, was exactly what she expected from him. Tauren's ever-changing aerial attacks were so tricky, it was impossible for even a Demon Lord Seed-class fighter to catch them, but it was a different story for Frey. After a few repetitions, she began to recognize the patterns to the point that she could read Tauren's initial speed to predict where the next attack was coming from. Some of the very strongest could move around in complete disregard of the laws of physics, so it was dangerous to assume too much, but Frey had already confirmed that Tauren was bound by the laws of this key world. That was why she felt safe to tell him. Assumptions can be dangerous things, you know. I'm kind of a wimp, so it takes me a while to be sure about something. She had just finished saying that when Tauren reached the exact position she anticipated he would be in. The next thing Tauren noticed was the pain from a claw piercing his chest area exoskeleton. It had a metallic sheen he'd always been proud of, but the exoskeleton wasn't as strong as his aluminium fists. Adamantite would be enough to penetrate it, as had just been proven. Huh? Tauren was shocked. But it was already too late. He struggled as best he could to resist, but none of his skills were activating. The moment he was in Frey's claws, the battle had already been decided. Inside Tauren's now shredded chest was a magic core, a vital part of all insectors. It was firmly within Frey's talons. So, goodbye, then. The core shattered into a million brilliant pieces, and that was the moment of Tauren's death. Lucia and Claire offered Frey their congratulations. Great work, Lady Frey. Yes, it was so amazing. Now we can fully commit to the sweep-up, right? Frey replied, gracefully nodding. I'm tired, of course, but this battle is going to last a decent while longer. I don't think I have time to rest, either. She looked across the battlefield. Her eyes caught a glimpse of a few of her companions, all struggling. Frey had the upper hand throughout her fight, but that wasn't true for everyone. Although he wasn't as badly outgunned as Phobio and Esprit, Gable, who had come in as a reinforcement, had to put up a desperate resistance as his enemy thrashed him around. Gable certainly was no pushover. The new strength he had gained had turned him into one of the toughest forces on his side. But his opponent was just too much. Beathop, one of the insect masters, was too strong a foe for Gable to handle. His EP was over 1.7 million, while Gable's was 1.26 million. The difference in existence points wasn't decisive, but a higher percentage of Beathop's EP was tied directly to his raw physical ability and combat expertise. He wasn't bristling with special powers, but that just made him the perfect insectoid for melee combat. That, in turn, made him a poor match for the more jack-of-all-trades Gable. If he were all by himself, he would have tasted defeat long ago. It was only his fighting companion who prevented that from happening. Are you all right, Gable? Sufia asked. Yes. Yes, I am still going strong. Do not worry for me, Lady Sufia. Gable and Sufia, who had previously teamed up against Midray during the invasion of Eurasania, were back together in the battle against Beathop. Sufia was also a commander of the Flying Beastly Knights, but for now, that job was left to her troops. Phobio had relinquished his own command earlier, which made the takeover process a bit trickier than usual, but Sufia wasn't really suited for command work anyway. Once everyone was in place and she had sufficiently propped up their morale, she usually did her own thing. Besides, if she could use her skills as an individual to take down as many enemy generals as possible, that'd lead to better results for everyone. She was fully aware of this, and in this skirmish as well, she didn't hesitate to throw herself in, but Xeranus's forces weren't going down that easily, and even though they had a 2-on-1 advantage, it was still an uphill battle. Good, good. This is how things should be fought. Beathop laughed, clearly excited. In a way, he was drunk on his own power. Defeating the weak with his overwhelming force was a source of constant enjoyment. For him, a battle was like a game he was always guaranteed to win. In that respect, Gable and Sufia were the perfect opponents for him. One at a time wouldn't have been enough excitement, and this scenario, where he was at a numerical disadvantage, was another novel thrill for Beatop. That was why he enjoyed this fight so much, even though he could have finished them off much sooner. Such impure motivations were easily telegraphed to his opponents, and they made Gable and Sufia deplore their lack of ability as they desperately searched for a way to win. "I have met many strong opponents in my time," said Gable, "but you seem to be the strongest of them all." "Oh? Do I? How nice to hear. But I won't go easy on you." Beatop really did sound happy about it. Gable and Sufia, meanwhile, were loudly shouting their displeasure. "Ha! Don't make me laugh. Like you were fighting seriously at all up to now." "Yeah, you said it. If you're a warrior, start acting like one. Don't just torment your foes like this." Beatop wasn't trying to coast at all, but he was certainly keen on prolonging the fun as much as possible. Gable and Sufia could tell. It offended them both, but thanks to that, they were still alive, which made it even more irritating. Being saved by the arrogant pride of your enemy was nothing but humiliation. Gable, exasperated with the situation, took a swig of healing potion. Sufia did the same, chugging an expensive full potion without a second thought. But none of the many wounds that covered their bodies showed any sign of disappearing. The reason was simple: the existence points on both of them had surpassed what these potions could handle. Sufia herself had evolved, influenced by Carillion's own awakening, and her EP was up to just under 500,000. That wasn't as high as Gable, but it was still in a class of its own, up there with high-level magic-born and members of the Crusaders. Even a medicine potent enough to replace whole limbs on a regular person couldn't do much on a body like hers. Full potions worked by energizing the cells of a body with magicules, compensating as needed to reconstruct any missing parts. But the cells that comprised these magic-born were already densely packed with magicules, so a potion or two wouldn't reconstruct much of anything. Both of them had already used over 100 potions during this battle. Sprinkling it on their bodies was effective enough for slight wounds, so they were both drenched all over with the stuff. "Good thing we improved how these things taste," Gable remarked. "I think I'm going to take a long break from potions after this." "You said it," Sufia agreed. "I liked the strawberry flavor at first, but I feel so bloated now." Sufia, more dependent on healing potions than Gable, sounded like she'd had her fill for a long time to come. But she was lucky to still be safe and sound, thanks in part to her training with Midray. For the past few months, they had both been learning the art of close-range combat with him. If it weren't for the defensive screen provided by Battlewill, which they had gained something of a mastery of, they would have died before they could even pop the cork on a potion. But all it took was a change in Beatop's mood for that streak of luck to end. Whoa, is Tauren dead?" he asked. He ignored Gable and Sufia's chit-chat as soon as he realized Frey had taken down one of his allies. When a battle was that evenly matched, a single collapse in one corner could have a domino effect. Beatop, well aware of this, decided playtime was over. "Oh well. I wanted to take my time finishing you off, but I'll have to break out one of my secret moves instead." It wasn't that he had been strictly playing around so far, it was just that his foes were doing better than he expected, but the fight had remained even only because Beatop was pacing himself. He didn't want to tap into his full strength yet, a fighting style that had much in common with Carillion's, so he conserved his energy as he dealt with them. But with one of his companions down, he couldn't worry about some indistinct future. It was time to switch to annihilation mode. "You will die," he whispered, and then he disappeared. Using his leg strength, he closed the distance between him and Sufia at once, even more instantaneously than what instant move could accomplish. Then he landed a kick on Sufia. She was, of course, using magic sense to track Beatop instead of relying on her eyes. She used to fight strictly with her own latent skills, but she was graduating from that style and polishing her tactics. But Beatop was just moving too fast. It was no wonder, he was attacking with all his might, without a single thought given to any damage he'd take. "Gar?" Sufia gasped. Sufia barely protected herself with both arms, but she paid a grim price for it. Her crossed arms were crushed, and then she received an intensely powerful kick to the abdomen. "Lady Sophia?" Gable shouted as Beathop stopped, still in his kicking stance. Gable readied himself, eyes turned fully toward Sophia. She was just barely alive. Just one blow, and look at the state she's in, thought Gable. Sophia was no longer in any shape to remain on the front line. Gable found it a stroke of luck that she was alive at all. But even that thought was naive of him. As a warrior, Gable wasn't in the habit of unnecessarily hurting his defeated opponents. It was against his own ethic to go out of his way to kill someone even after victory was assured. He understood, of course, that this was a battlefield, and that some people think of killing as a way of achieving justice. He just didn't think anyone would bother pursuing an already rooted foe for no good reason. In other words, Gable assumed Beathop was like him, a skilled warrior, and wouldn't take any action that'd leave him open to attack, but reality can be cruel that way. Turning his back to Gable, Beathop swung the leg that was still hanging in the air down upon Sophia. RRGH. There was a dull thud as Sophia vomited blood. Beathop's foot had shattered her heart. And Gable, who was using his accelerated thought process, realized exactly what was happening. At this rate, she was absolutely going to die. No. He's prioritizing finishing her off so much that he's leaving himself open to me? Or he must be sure he could withstand anything I could throw at him. It was a humiliating thought, but Gable didn't think he was mistaken. The difference in skill between Gable and Beathop made that scenario seem extremely likely. So he contemplated. His mind was a mess, but his thoughts, at least, were calm. Should he risk it all on this opportunity he was given and aim for victory? Or? The choice is obvious. A choice that Suraimuru will undoubtedly praise me for, no less. It took less than a moment for his mind to be made up. Whether this plan would work was a gamble, but Gable had supreme confidence in his own powers. "I'm not letting you die, Lady Sophia." With that shout, he hurled his vortex spear, his precious possession, one he valued as his comrade in arms, at Beathop. Then as Beathop evaded it, he rushed towards Sophia, and unleashed his power. He wasn't entirely sure whether it'd work on people besides him, but trusting in it was the only way to help Sophia. "Destiny, return for me. Hear my wishes and work a miracle," Gable prayed. He believed with every fiber of his being that Sophia would come back to life, and that he had the power to help with that. And then alter destiny, the power of Moodmaker, his ultimate gift, began to rewrite the tragedy that was about to come. Beathop, who had left himself wide open to Gable in the middle of battle, turned toward him, giving him a quizzical look. He quickly reasoned that if his foe had given up his spear, he must have given up the fight as well. "Fool," Beathop said, sneering at him. "I'll send you right along to where your friend is going." Even to those who had lost all will to fight, Beathop showed no mercy. Mercy, he believed, led to nothing but carelessness. Low-level insectors had no concept of mercy, or any emotions, for that matter, so the fact Beathop understood what love was showed how exceptional a member of his race he was. To those fighting him, though, that was cold comfort at best. A gust of wind danced across the battlefield. Beathop, once again unleashing his power, executed his trademark spindle kick, aiming it squarely at Gable. The aluminium covering his outstretched foot shone with a dull radiance, seeming to spell doom for Gable's continued existence. But that future never arrived. Destiny had been altered, and Sophia was fully restored. "Look the hell out, Gable," she shouted. As soon as she was resurrected, Sophia took evasive action, following her instincts to warn Gable of the danger. Gable promptly rolled out of the way, as if driven by her voice. Beathop's kick wound up cracking the ground under him, but both Gable and Sophia safely avoided the danger. "Phew, you saved me," Gable said. "You saved me, I'd say," replied Sophia. "I thought I was dead, but you got me out of that." "Yes. It was a do-or-die wager, but I'm tremendously glad it worked." The relief at escaping that crisis made the ensuing conversation far more casual than it would have been otherwise. But Beatop was still there. The real fight was just beginning. "Oh, I thought I killed you," he said. "Why, are you all right?" "I love explaining how that works, but don't expect me to tell you." Sufia scoffed. PFFT. "Very well. I'll just finish the job next time." Cutting off the chat, Beatop mustered his strength once more. But Gable interrupted him. "Don't bother trying. I happen to notice just now that you cannot use your strength continuously without end. Am I right? Otherwise, you wouldn't have any reason to waste time talking to us." Gable sounded confident. Beatop had speed that outclassed Apito's, and his punches and kicks had just as much weight as Geld's. He moved with almost total freedom, accelerating and stopping in quick and unpredictable ways, and not even Apito could copy his level of agility. Keeping up with it was a difficult task, and dodging his strikes seemed all but impossible. That was what made Gable start to wonder. Apito herself told me that speeding up is easy enough, but stopping on a dime is much harder. Hinata used magic to twist the law of inertia in her favor, making all kinds of mind-boggling moves possible, but I don't think this foe is relying on any magic. That leaves one scenario. Either he was using some special latent skill to rewrite physics for himself, or he was relying on brute force. So Gable kept watching him, keeping those two possibilities firmly in mind. Then he noticed it. After every attack, Beatop was using ultra-speed regeneration on his own body. Through this, he could push his body beyond its limits to fight. There was one good way to put a stop to this. If he kept forcing himself to attack in ways his body couldn't handle, Beatop was bound to self-destruct in time. All Gable had to do was focus entirely on defense and wait for that moment to arrive. Still, these were attacks from a powerful foe, one using a kind of doping to make himself even stronger. A moment of inattention would lead to death from a single blow. It was almost too dangerous a tightrope to walk. The overcharged attacks Beatop was risking his own life to unleash came at several times the speed of Apito's, and even worse, they really could kill Gable in one shot if they hit him in the right place. A hit in any arm or leg would blow it clean off, even a glancing strike could cause major damage. Gable knew putting up with this barrage would make this a tough battle. So he tried to make Beatop rethink his tactics. Even without doping himself, Beatop could still outclass him. If he knew his trick was exposed, Gable hoped, maybe he would revert to a more traditional strategy. An awkward silence. But it was Beatop's loud laughter that broke it. "Gah ha 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 ha. Good, good. As weak as you are, you still never fail to amuse me." The mood around him changed once more. "Yes, I admit it. That's what I was doing. And now, I promise you I will make a full effort to kill you." The bet didn't pay off. What? Gable didn't like where this was going. He made this big show, trying to act as cool as possible, and there was no backing out. Sufia was behind him, too, so running away was out of the question. At this point, all he could do was say his prayers and do whatever he could to survive. If I at least had the vortex spear in hand. He had just casually tossed aside the treasured spear of the lizard men, wanted to go grab it, but he doubted Beatop would ever let him. So Gable steeled himself. And the moment all his senses were honed to a sharp point. "Sir Gable. You dropped this." The voice of Sukero entered the scene. He himself soon followed, vortex spear in hand, trying to look as heroic as possible. "This guy's been fighting alongside us this whole time, hasn't he? Don't just let go of it like that." "Indeed," Kakushin replied with a nod, "truly. With this weapon, Sir Gable, you're the strongest in the world. So hurry up and whip that guy for us." Yashichi, as usual, was harming Gable more than helping him. But even the vortex sphere itself was trembling in Sukero's hands, as if to acknowledge its master. "All of you." Gable could feel hot tears well up in his eyes. Wait. Why is the spear pulsing like that, as if it's got a heartbeat? It seemed like an important thing to address. But we believe in you, Sir Gable, said Sukero. Indeed, agreed Kakushin. You're about to show off big time for us, aren't you, Sir Gable? Added Yashichi. His 3 assistants were expecting a lot from him, although it felt like they were pushing him into the abyss rather than cheering for him. Yashichi in particular was less than welcome. He may have been blissfully unaware of it, but every word from him cornered Gable more and more. There was no longer any time to think about what was up with the spear. Gable stood strong and puffed out his chest as usual, but then something unusual happened. Sufia offered her encouragement as well. Yeah, I have to agree. These guys are right, Gable. Even to me, you look really cool. About as cool as Sir Carillion, in fact. A bombshell for Gable. What? I'm cool? Sufia's voice echoed in Gable's head. He could no longer think about anything else. Beat Hop, the lethal threat right in front of him, couldn't have been farther from his mind. What else could he do? Gable had never received a compliment from the opposite sex before. Certainly people had given him longing looks behind his back, but Gable tended to be oblivious about that sort of thing. He'd never noticed the subtleties of a woman's heart, and his personality was fundamentally incompatible with romance. Thus, he had been constantly extending his no-girlfriend record for all his adult days. And now Sufia was saying he was cool out of nowhere. This was the most monumental moment in Gable's life. I have to say it. If I let this chance pass by, I may well never have a girl. Gable drummed up his courage. It said that the threat of looming death stimulates the urge to procreate and produce offspring in the minds of most animals, and that was exactly the state he was in. How to put it? Sometimes, you know, I look at you, Lady Sufia, and I think you are beautiful, and, He could have chosen a more romantic backdrop than this battlefield for confessing his feelings to her. The timing made the audience want to wail in despair. His courage was exhausted in an instant, his voice trailing off to a near whisper as he put the words together. The fact he couldn't even finish the thought was typical Gable behavior, too. But despite how pathetic he felt about it, his confession got through to Sufia. Huh? She said. Seriously? You think I'm beautiful? Not cute, but beautiful. This extreme situation was making Sufia lose her mind, too. One could see that by how her voice had ratcheted up an octave or two. In a way, they were a perfect match. Well, yes. Gable was right not to deny it. If he did, destiny would likely have taken him down a different path. But by choosing the right answer, he had Lady Luck beginning to smile at him. Gable, what could I ever do with you? Sufia mused. But now's a bad time. Once we beat him and this battle is over, I'll give you a little thank you smooch. Sufia was in such high spirits that she didn't even understand what she was saying. The situation got her so carried away that she made what she'd otherwise call a completely preposterous promise. But Gable still had his feet on the ground. He took Sufia's words to heart. A smooch? Does she mean a kiss? So she's not going to beat me up over this? This was unprecedented. His panicked brain was running at top gear, trying to assess this monumental event. And the trio of Yashichi, Kakushin, and Sukero were there to egg him on. Wow, Sir Gable. What a stud. Phew. What a surprise. I knew you always come through in a pinch, but confessing your love on a battlefield? That's just too bold. Indeed. This is how a true man lives his life. 3 cheers for Gable. 3 cheers for Gable. Woo. They were singing for him, and there was no stopping them, so Gable shut off his brain and let his body dance among them. This whole process had repeated itself so often, it was all muscle memory to him. His mind was immersed in all manner of happy fantasies. He. At long last, I have a girlfriend. Ha ha. It's hard, isn't it, being such an attractive man? It was beyond too early for that talk, but since it was strictly Gable's own fantasy scenario, no one found out about it. Beatop was losing his patience. He thought all this was a trap at first, but the 3 lizardmen who came on the scene weren't showing any signs of joining the fight. That was helpful for him. Beatop had already been forcibly enhancing his battle skills by dangerous and possibly injurious means, so he couldn't afford any more surprises. He could heal his injuries with ultra-speed regeneration, of course, but the vast amount of energy it consumed was a problem. His main aim was to recover his strength without having to overexert himself so he could finish off everybody at once. Now his stamina was back up to maximum. There was no longer any need for restraint, so Beatop was ready to resume his pummeling of Gable, or, really, he wanted to kill him with a single blow. Ignoring me, going on about all this meaningless nonsense. Well, fine. Time to teach you exactly where you stand with me. The anger within him compelled Beatop to break out another spindle kick, this time on Gable. But then something truly surprising happened. Do not get in my way, you. I am experiencing one of the most epoch-making moments of my life. As Gable shouted this, he struck Beatop with his spear, and that alone sent Beatop flying helplessly into the air. It was an unbelievable turn of events, and it made the awestruck Beatop open all his compound eyes wide. What did you just do? Beatop exclaimed. Gable wasn't listening. Lady Sophia, by smooch, what did you mean, exactly? Only then did Sophia realize exactly what she had said to him. It made her blush terribly, but she couldn't take that offer back now. Well, you know, she said, trying to make it sound as trivial and inconsequential as possible. Gable nodded several times at her. I hear you loud and clear. And I swear I will fight with all my might until victory is mine. He was fully roused. Any despair he might have felt a moment ago was gone. Whether he'd win or not no longer mattered, he would win. It was with this energized fighting spirit that he glared at Beatop. Don't mess with me, you worm. Gable's attitude made Beatop furious. How could someone this inferior have such an inflated opinion of himself? But at the same time, Beatop didn't forget the strange phenomenon that had just occurred. He thought it was just a coincidence, but now he was on the lookout for anything that might happen. But was it really a coincidence? I attacked him many times, intending to kill. I didn't go easy on him. I could even feel my blows hitting home. So why the hell is he still alive? His instincts told him this wasn't just happenstance. He readied himself against his foe, who was proving more dangerous than he looked. Gable, on the other hand, was still basking in the thought that he might have just landed a girlfriend. Their minds were in 2 completely different places, and as sad as it must have been for Beatop, the world can be a very absurd place sometimes. Here I go, Gable shouted, sneering at his foe. Beatop silently acknowledged him, and then, the next moment, they crossed paths. There was no restraint. Beatop was pushing beyond his maximum force, spinning his entire body like a drill as he flew at supersonic speed. All his power was concentrated into a pair of aluminium poison needles protruding from his fists. This was Spindle Needle Spear, his most powerful finishing move. Gable, meanwhile, was sticking to fundamentals as he held his vortex sphere forward. Keeping himself calm, he stared at Beatop, waiting for the right moment to fire off his own special move. 2 large whirlpools swelled and collided on the battlefield, and in the end, it was Beatop who fell. Vortex crash. Gable's special move cut right through Beatop. Whoa. So cool, Sir Gable. Indeed, an impressive sight. The half-shocked praise from Gable's trio of lackeys was to be expected. All the struggling up to then seemed like a mirage compared with this dominating attack. Beatop wasn't being careless or complacent, and this was what happened to him. The secret lay in the vortex spear itself. Gable was too preoccupied with his potential new girlfriend to notice, but amid this crisis, the spear had evolved into a god-class weapon, one that, of course, recognized Gable as its fitting and proper master. Thanks to that, Gable's overall existence points now exceeded Beatop's. The 2 were almost matched in battle skill, and after that clash, it was Gable who emerged victorious. Garbill. 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 He did a little victory dance as the trio cheered for him. Sophia watched, smiling, and then remembered the promise she made. She blushed, something Gable didn't fail to notice. He blushed, too. They stood there for a bit, frozen and gazing at each other. "You know, I think we better leave these lovebirds alone." "Indeed." "Best of luck to you, Sir Gable." The lackeys quickly took their leave. Gable and Sophia didn't much relish the idea of being alone, but even there, one had to admit they were a good match for each other. Between Gable's confession and the roller coaster of a battle they just experienced, it didn't take long for them to finally be honest with each other. That day on the battlefield, spring arrived in Gable's life. The death of Tauren the insect master wound up triggering major changes across the battlefield, and that was true for more than just Gable and Sophia. Carillion, Midray, and Obila were also watching the situation closely, wary of the apparent shift in the balance of power. Now was the time, they thought, to go all in. Carillion was the first to move. "Hare. Frey won, huh? Well, I'm not about to lose, either." He smiled boldly as he glared at a bolt. With all the limbs a bolt boasted, he was talented in both melee combat and magical fighting. His slender legs, flexible and covered in an exoskeleton of aluminium, were sharper than a spear as they plunged into foes. He could then use his free limbs to connect magical seals, letting him invoke spells without any casting time. This combination of magic and unique physical skills made it seem like Carillion was in trouble at first. But the reality was different. Carillion was biding his time, waiting for his opportunity. How could he conserve Burst Roar, his finisher, and defeat a bolt with as little effort as possible? That was the thought on his mind as he probed a bolt for weak points. Right from the start of battle, Carillion realized he had an advantage. But that didn't mean he was taking it easy. A bolt's strength was the real thing, and if Carillion let his guard down, he could very easily be defeated. He also had a gut feeling that trying to rush the fight would lead to needless injury and unnecessary danger. He was right to think so, too. A bolt entered a runaway fugue state whenever his strength was about to run out, tripling his attack and healing powers. If it happened to him, Carillion would suddenly have a lot of trouble to deal with. At worst, he'd lose the fight. But once his wild intuition clued him in on this possibility, he was able to hold his own on the front line without issue. And as he did, he read and recognized all of a bolt's other habits, too. Once he grasped how much time was needed to invoke magic again after a spell, along with the time it took a bolt to retract a pointed limb after a strike, Carillion waited for his foe to unleash both at once. Then, at long last, it happened. The defeat of Tauren the insect master at the hands of Frey caused a bolt to be impatient. "I was waiting for that." Beast Roar. The technique burrowed its way through a bolt's torso. The flash of magic particles further expanded the effect, completely swallowing a bolt up. Midray was calmly observing the battlefield. Saril, the insect master before him, barely registered in his mind. He was always in perfect control of his own body, always exerting only a certain amount of force at a time. If he wanted to, he could even adjust his body to the level of his opponent, allowing him to more purely enjoy the act of combat. In that respect, and that one alone, he shared a tendency or two with Diablo. That was Midray's habit, and he had fallen back on that habit with Saril. "You're not committing well," Midray said. "You seem to be confident in your poison skills, but that won't work on me. If your poison tail-based attack style is no longer effective, what will you do then?" There was a taunting tone to his voice. "You conceited little," Saril snapped at Midray's mockery. But while his anger increased the force behind his attack, it meant little if he couldn't hit a target with it. His style in this fight had grown repetitive and monotonous, exactly what Midray wanted. It would have been easy to just finish him off, but Midray refrained from that because of a new, eerie presence he sensed. "What is this strange, sticky feeling? I can feel it probing my powers. Oh, have you lost interest, then? I suppose I should take that to mean it could kill me any time it wants." The presence reminded Midray of Milim, whom he worshipped as a god. But there was none of the warmth Milim usually gave him. This was far colder, devoid of any emotion, and more than a tad frightening as a result. So Midray opted to keep Sarl alive as he tried to work out what this was. I must hand it to Obila. She spotted this, too. Obila, too, was observing the battlefield instead of wrapping up the fight against her insect master opponent. The difference in strength between them would have allowed Obila to defeat this insector in an instant, so Midray was sure she was thinking the same thing he was. No one else seemed to have noticed. That was certainly true for Carrera as she took on Zeph. Their battle was intense, with no room for anyone else to get involved, and she certainly didn't have the free time to focus on anything else. The same was true for Geld. The insect master he faced, resembling an anthropomorphized giant centipede, had the second highest EP after period and seemed like a fairly even match with Geld. He couldn't afford to worry about other matters, and Midray didn't want to needlessly worry him. The duo of Gobta and Ranga were in way over their heads with period, of course, so they couldn't have noticed, either. Nonetheless, Midray was truly grateful they came on the scene at that point. The way things stood, Phobio and Esprit were doomed, and Midray feared he'd have to step in to rescue them. He appreciated not having to. This new, eerie presence was too concerning to make any sudden moves. He resolved to repay the favor by helping Gobta out with his training later, although Gobta was unlikely to see that as a favor at all. All this had prolonged the stalemate for a while, but things were on the move. Frey had defeated the insect master Tauren, Gable had taken out Beathop, and Carillion had just wrapped up with a bolt. Now, though, that ominous presence that filled the battlefield felt to Midray like it had grown denser and more dangerous. He didn't know why, but something bad was happening. He was convinced of that, and he was bracing himself for it. His colleagues Carillion and Frey, having won their respective battles, seemed to have finally picked up on the presence. Their instincts probably spotted it long ago, but now they were convinced something was up. Those two still have work to do as well, don't they? They fight decently enough at this point, but they need to learn how to pay attention to their surroundings. They'll have trouble keeping up with Lady Milim otherwise. It was a rather harsh evaluation, but that was how Midray really felt. Khehe, Sarl laughed. You've had fun mocking me, haven't you? I hate to break out my best moves against you, but whatever. Seeing Midray treat him like a second thought incensed Sarl. Stabbing himself with his own poison-tipped tail, he activated his fugue state on his own volition. With Sarl's speed and strength multiplied several times over, not even Midray could afford to play around any longer. Despite the deep foreboding in his mind, he decided to finish up this fight, and when he was serious about fighting, he was a menace. Using his palpable fighting aura to bind the advancing Sarl, he immediately rendered him helpless, and after that, a sure-kill frontal strike was all it took to make Sarl's body burst into a million pieces. A true one-hit kill. Midray was a man strong enough to be Milim's training partner, or playmate, and this man of steel had just lived up to his reputation once more. But his face was filled with gloom. Not good. The chill has only grown stronger. Midray looked up at the sky, which had filled with dark clouds. A little voice in the back of his head told him killing Sarl would be a mistake. Just as Midray had guessed, Obila could feel the danger as well. It's so strange. The pressure from our enemy hasn't changed at all since the start of this battle. Obila's enemy was the vicious Tishorn, capable of cutting through anything by finely vibrating the alionium exoskeleton covering her arms, but she was like a child to Obila. The only reason Obila hadn't dispatched Tishorn yet was because she had the same concern Midray did. Many lives were being lost on the battlefield. Thanks to potions keeping damage to a minimum and a strategy where anyone hurt was immediately replaced, there were still no deaths on Obila's side. However, the insectors were waging an onslaught with no care at all about casualties, and their force had already been reduced to less than half its initial size. Nonetheless, the enemy force Obila detected with her super intuition skill was still just as powerful as before, with no decline whatsoever. It was an uncomfortable feeling at first, but once Frey defeated Tauren, she became sure of it. One of the enemy's greatest fighters was dead, but nothing felt different. It meant not even losing an insect master dented the insector force at all, or maybe it meant something even worse. Perhaps losing insect masters was even part of the enemy's strategy. No way. That's just preposterous. But she couldn't call it impossible. She recalled the time when her colleague Zorario complained about how stubborn those guys were. Just beating them isn't enough. They can be even more of a menace afterward, sometimes, so you gotta choose where you engage them carefully. Obila was surprised to hear that from the normally taciturn Zorario. She assumed he must have been tired from work and left it at that, but looking back, what he said now seemed very important to her. She had never asked him for more detail, she didn't see the insectors as her job, so she didn't feel like engaging him that much. That was a bad habit that went beyond just Obila. Feldway and the other top mystics tended to be that way, but now she regretted it. They really needed to keep each other abreast of the bigger problems, at least. But it was too late for that. Obila had no information to work with, so her only choice was to adapt to the situation and feel around for the optimal response. She kept a close eye on the battlefield, even as she engaged Tishorn in combat. Then, before she could land on anything decisive, the state of the battle began to quickly change. First Tauren fell, then Beathop and Abolt were slain. But despite losing these generals, the enemy's war power didn't decline one bit. Seeing these results, there was no longer any doubt that this was part of the enemy's scheme. This is dangerous. Maybe we should stop defeating insect masters. Those foes needed to be defeated, but Obila and her allies needed to play it safe, first and foremost. If something unanticipated was going on, they had to stay calm and eliminate the source of the issue. With her mind made up, Obila attempted to speak up about her concerns. She was just a bit too late. Right at that moment, Midray eliminated Saril. The remaining insect masters were Tishorn, facing off against Obila, Mujika, whom Geld was keeping in check, who was still giving Gobta and Ranga a hard time, and finally Zeth, whose battle against Carrera was in another dimension from everyone else. Half the insectors had been defeated, leaving just those four. A pall crossed Obila's face for a moment, as if she knew something bad was going to happen. It didn't escape Tishorn's attention. Ho ho ho. I see you've noticed, said Tishorn. The lower-level insect masters are nothing more than the first act. With the power of those such as my master, it doesn't matter whether they're here or not. Tishorn had the strength to back that statement up. She was a high-level insect master, number 4 on the depth chart, and her EP was over 1.8 million, not much different from Period, but her presence near the top of the 12 insect masters over many eons demonstrated just what she was capable of. Cross-dimension slash. The shock wave that shot out from Tishorn's arms became a cutting edge, ruthlessly slashing through everything it encountered. Its effects reached across dimensions, and while these tears in spacetime were instantly repaired by the healing power of the world, nothing else that encountered this blade could withstand it. Obila, of course, was no exception to this. She had instantly spotted it coming and wasn't incompetent enough to let it hit her, but now it was clear Tishorn was more of a threat than she'd thought. She had acted to ensure the damage was kept to a minimum, but Obila wasn't too sure her approach was working. Cross-dimension slash. Tishorn broke it out again. The violent shock wave surged toward Obila. Trying the same move? Obila said. You know it won't work twice. Ho ho ho, Tishorn laughed. What an interesting thing to say. Whether it works is for me to decide, not you. Tishorn had a point. No one was foolish enough to take the enemy at their word. If Tishorn thought it wouldn't work, she wouldn't have used it again. She thought it'd have its intended effect, and so she launched the same attack twice. And Obila only advised her against it because she didn't want that to happen. The advice wasn't taken, of course, which gave Obila a new respect for her foe. The way she so casually makes the most optimal decision each time proves she's very used to battle. It'd be easy enough to simply win, But if I want to disable her without taking her life, that'd be tough even for me. Obila had already seen just how capable Tishorn was. There was a clear difference in strength between them, with Obila firmly at the top, however, that was based on the assumption that she hadn't been wounded in the battle against Michael. All of Obila's external wounds had healed. Physically, she was in good shape. But she hadn't fully replenished her energy yet, and it'd be a mistake to say she was in top form. Otherwise, she would have neutralized Tishorn long ago. Now she couldn't, and that was why she was in this mess. But either way, there was no time left for indecision. "Behold, my master." The moment Tishorn shouted that, her fighting skills took a great leap. Just like Saril, she could put herself into overdrive mode at will. But there was one difference from Saril: unlike him, she had full control of her overdrive mode, letting her make more effective use of its time limit, cross-dimension / dance of conclusions. It was an attack like nothing before it. The shock wave sliced its way through tens of thousands of dimensions, a death-dealing rampage that was impossible for anyone to escape. Such was the awe-inspiring sight Obila saw. In response, Obila simply stood where she was, not trying to flee at all. Or so it seemed. Now that she had given up on neutralizing Tishorn, Obila had decided to break out all her force and simply kill her instead. "Divine nature, release," she softly stated. It was the only warning she gave that she was about to give her full effort. The god-class gear she was clad in regained its star-like sparkle, with Obila running her magical force through it. It was back to its original level of performance. In Obila's hands was a gigantic double-edged sword. This was the Beast Slayer, Obila's beloved longsword, evolved into its true form. The cryptids were Obila's sworn enemy, and against them, she had to abandon any noble aim to go easy. If she was that lenient, there'd be no end to the damage they'd cause. She always worked hard to exterminate them with optimal efficiency, and so, once Obila decided to fight, the only allowable conclusion was to destroy the enemy, no matter what happened to her surroundings. The true nature of her 20 million EP rating was about to be demonstrated to the world. Ho ho ho. A little too late to fight for keeps now. Just as Tishorn said, Obila was already trapped in the zone of extinction the cross-dimension slash had just created. This kept Obila from escaping via spatial transport, and so there was no way to prevent the incoming blade from slicing her to pieces. Or there shouldn't have been. But in the end, that was nothing more than child's play, Obila said. The dimensional slash hit home, ripping open the space around her. But once it reverted to its original form, Obila's body was restored as well, like nothing had happened to her. "No," Tishorn gasped. "My body is connected not only to the physical world, but to the spiritual one as well. This much of an attack won't even touch me." Obila blithely explained this as she began to rev up her own magic force, all but declaring it was her turn. The Beast Slayer began to shine. Seeing that ominous light, Tishorn was confused by an emotion she had never felt before in her life. "My body is shaking. I can't be scared, can I? Could it be I'm frightened of her?" She saw that, but it was too late. There was nothing else Tishorn could do. "May you be beautiful as you fade to nothing," Obila shouted. Planetary bombing. A ponderous barrage of slashes rained down from the heavens, dealing out death in a merciless but equal fashion. Tishorn, too, was caught up in it, and so she was vaporized, unable even to enjoy the honorable death of the truly strong. Geld was holding his own. He was up against the insect master Mujika, a warrior-type insector whose gaudy armor resembled a medieval shogun's. With the long sword he wielded using both hands, his strength was equal to Geld's, and neither side gave an inch. The troops who served both fighters were also struggling against one another, alternately advancing and retreating. The yellow and orange numbers, maintaining an ironclad defensive line, pushed back a swarm of giant centipedes led by Mujika, each a good 100 feet in length. The sheer size difference meant the numbers needed to form teams to deal with each individual insect. Anyone hurt was healed with a recovery potion, anyone exhausted was replaced with a rearguard fighter to keep the front line strong. Their regular training was paying off. This continued for several hours, with neither side gaining a clear advantage, but the one-on-one duel between Geld and Mujika was undoubtedly the highlight of the encounter. Mujika wielded his sword with the skill of a first-rate samurai. Looking at it, it was hard to believe he was self-taught in this technique. The other world where the insectors came from was thought to have its own group of reincarnated otherworlders, but that didn't matter right now. The only certainty was that Mujika was a formidable opponent. Geld stopped the blade with his large shield. That piece of gear, too, had become one with Geld as it evolved into the god class. It was like Geld's own flesh and blood, transformed to the point that it worked somewhat like an insector's exoskeleton. As a result, any damage exacted upon it was instantly repaired. Even against an impact that shook the earth and scattered plasma everywhere, Geld kept his cool, using his meat cleaver weapon to mow Mujika down in return. But Mujika, just as great a fighter, saw the blow coming and parried it with his sword. Countless legs shot out from the gaps in his armor, unleashing a torrent of blows that pierced Geld. Despite the apparent crisis, Geld responded with a round of Lord's ambition. His ultimate gift, Beelzebub, Lord of Gastronomy, applied a rot effect to his own aura, resulting in the skill Chaos Eater. Chaos Eater seemed to have a will of its own, moving around erratically as it bit at Mujika's legs, but Mujika proved supreme. The evil aura around him eliminated Geld's Chaos Eater. The back and forth continued in this fashion, with no end in sight. But even in this battle, the end came all too suddenly. Mujika said. Tishorn has died, too. Who could have imagined it? I did not expect this land to put up so much of a resistance, but now the preparations for my master are complete. Geld asked. Oh, it's nothing to do with you. It has been too long since I encountered a warrior who could keep up with me. It is a pity. I wanted to wage battle with you for longer, but my departure has drawn near. Mujika stepped away from Geld, saying no more. Then he prepared for a retreat, taking his insects along with him. Geld kept his guard up. But then he, too, noticed. Something is strange with the air around here. This intense fear. Is it a sign something is about to happen? The air was pregnant with such an intense feeling of danger, he wondered how he hadn't noticed it before. Geld looked up. Dark clouds were swirling, as if something was about to manifest among them. All troops, maintain full alert, he commanded. Upon his order, even those still being treated went on the move. His imposing, agitated tone, unusual for him, made them all understand the battle was far from over. Once Phobia was safely rescued, Gobwa devoted herself to rebuilding the battle lines. Under Benimaru's guidance, she had developed into a first-rate commander. Her large-scale labyrinth training gave her experience with every kind of brutal tactic and expertise well beyond the reach of any run-of-the-mill strategist. The 300 members of Team Kurenai whom she led were also battle-hardened warriors, just like her. They always took the best course of action, regardless of whether Gobwa ordered it or not. As reinforcements went, they were concerningly small in number, but their presence still greatly improved the situation for their side. Here, too, the presence of a good commander had a significant impact on a battle. With Phobia back on the front lines and in command, the Flying Beastly Knights had rallied themselves back into action. The Milim forces were gradually regaining the upper hand. But amid this seemingly welcome turnaround, Gobda was nearly dead. His opponent was an almost unbelievable danger. Gobda had a fairly high resistance to poison, but the mist period emitted was powerful enough to kill even him instantly. It wasn't like a cyanide pill that killed if ingested, a mere touch would melt skin and burn flesh. Even the slightest bit of passing contact would cause extreme pain, a fact of which Gobda had become all too aware. Whoa. Eesh. I'm dying. If this keeps up, it's off to the afterlife for me. It took him less than 30 seconds of fighting to reach this conclusion. So without another moment of wavering, he decided to call over Ranga and employ his most secret move. Transform. In a flash, Gobda and Ranga became unified, transformed into a humanoid wolf with two ominous-looking horns. This was absolutely the right decision. If Gobta had pulled the trigger even a little later, he would have died in battle regardless of what Ranga did. "Okay, let's do this," he said. "You may use my power to the fullest, Gobta." The two were excited about this at first, but their enthusiasm quickly faded. The reason was simple: Period was still just as strong. This unification didn't vastly increase their combat skills or anything, it was the combination of Ranga's latent abilities and Gobta's battle sense that made them more than the sum of their parts. For that matter, Gobta's existence points weren't that high to start with, so in terms of pure stats, it wasn't really much of a difference. Period, on the other hand, oozed an aura of deadly despair just standing there. Her EP was 6.8 million, almost double what the unified Gobta and Ranga had, and that made her the second most powerful presence in this fight after Zeth. As if that wasn't enough, she had enough spatial control skills to even deflect Carrera's Abyss Annihilation. Even with Gobta digging this deep into his arsenal, Period was still far superior to him. The only reason he hadn't been defeated immediately was because Gobta and Ranga were close-range melee fighters, while Period was more proficient with magic-based mid- and long-range attacks. Thanks to that, Gobta had been in a hectic situation from the very start, unable to let his guard down for a moment. He was able to stay within his preferred range for most of it, which allowed him to keep the battle reasonably close, but that was about to end, now that Period herself was changing. "Gobta, have you noticed?" "Yeah, Ranga, and it's not looking good." "What's with her, huh? It's like she keeps getting pumped up with more power." Period, the adversary they faced, was starting to concern them deeply. Compared with at the start of hostilities, there were clear signs her fighting strength was increasing, not decreasing. For one, she was growing more and more capable of handling Gobta's moves. None of his feints worked any longer, costing him the valuable time he needed to launch an attack. His offense wasn't completely shut down yet, but Period's sharp attacks were starting to reach her opponent. Plus, instead of the simple strikes he had employed, Period was starting to put some truly murderous intent into her attacks. Growing in the middle of battle like this. "That's kinda cheating, isn't it?" Gobta said to Ranga. "It is a common thing. I have experienced it myself, so it doesn't surprise me to see the enemy do the same." "Well, no, but having it happen to me doesn't exactly seem fair." They dropped the banter after a while, realizing it was doing them no favors. This situation was not lost on Gobta. There would be no more help coming because they were the reinforcements. Rimuru, who enjoyed Gobta's eternal respect and would normally be coming along to help at any moment, was busy on another battlefield. The enemy this time around was too powerful for anyone to drop their post and step in for Rimuru. Benimaru might step in, yes, but Gobta preferred he didn't, since his absence back home could put the whole nation in danger, so. "Guess we're just gonna have to figure something out," said Gobta. "Yes," agreed Ranga. "If the enemy is powerful, we simply have to be more powerful than them." In the end, they settled on a no-guts, no-glory approach, not the greatest thing for a commander to rely on, but for Gobta, it offered a reason to push himself. People talk about fighting with their backs to the wall, and for Gobta, who always prudently kept an escape route in mind during every battle, having no such escape route helped him focus more on the fight. "Okay, we're gonna try to make this short and sweet." With renewed enthusiasm, Gobta accelerated his attack. But every attempt seemed to come up short. He attempted a surefire dual-pronged attack, using Dance with Wolves to distract Period long enough for Apocalypse Howling to hit home, but even that she successfully dodged. "Are you kidding me? This was my big move. I was practicing it and everything." Now even Gobta felt like this was a crisis. Ranga was the same way. "Should we perhaps retreat for now, Gobta?" "No. If we step back here, it'll be too much for Carrera to deal with." Ranga saw Gobta was right. If no reinforcements were incoming, one option was to run away and regroup, but that was a last resort at best. This was war, not a staged duel, and abandoning the front lines like that had too much of a negative impact on all their allies. But if Gobta's surefire finisher didn't work, he and Ranga would just be whittled down until they were defeated. Gobta didn't want to lose any more than the next person did, so he was desperately racking his brains for some new idea. Nothing was sprouting up, though, but then. "Let me assist you, Gobta." Carillion, fresh from defeating the insect master Abolt, noticed Gobta's predicament and joined the fight. And he wasn't alone. "I'll pitch in as well." Frey, too, had identified the danger period posed and offered her battle skills. Maybe ganging up on a single foe wasn't very fair, but again, this was war, not a duel. Victory always took precedence over honor, and Gobta was thus glad to accept this aid. "Thanks a ton," he gleefully shouted, and with that, the battle was back on. Or so everyone thought. "It's sad, so terribly sad, to think my children were so weak," Period muttered to herself, but her voice still reached the ears of all those present on the field. Everyone understood this was the bell signaling the final round. Carrera was fighting an evenly matched battle against Zeth, the chief insectoid. Zeth was a qualified opponent, but by no means one Carrera couldn't beat. In fact, she was enjoying this battle now that she knew it was just the kind of tough challenge she liked. So she showed off a few of her recently acquired skills. Her golden gun and blade, the same battle style Lieutenant Kondo preferred, also suited Carrera just fine. Her moves with them were so natural and effortless, one couldn't be blamed for assuming she had employed this weapon set for years and years. In addition, Carrera was used to fighting insectors. Normally, this foe would be giving her trouble. Instead, she wasn't losing a single step to him. Zeth, after all, was quite similar to someone Carrera already knew quite well, from his physique to the exoskeleton covering his whole body. Their fighting styles were completely different, but the quality of their strikes and the overpowering presence that made everyone else cower were dead ringers for Zijin, a person Carrera recognized as her ally and rival. Zeth's existence points were, in fact, mind-boggling. His score was well above Carrera's and a good 3 times where Zijin stood. But in terms of the threat they posed, Carrera felt Zijin still had the edge. She had fought him many times, and that was why she could stay a step ahead of Zeth's thought process, even though she had never met him before. At this point, Carrera wasn't imposing any limitations on herself, either. Diablo had come up with this goofball rule that she couldn't target any part of Zijin created with Rimuru cells, but that didn't apply to Zeth. That was what allowed Carrera to go all out here. There was an obstacle to this at the start, an obstacle by the name of Period, but Esprit and her friends had done everything in their power to get rid of that for her. It was a commendable effort, especially given how mismatched they were. And yeah, if my friends are putting in that kind of effort, I can't look like a lazy bum around them. In a way, then, Carrera was enjoying this fight to the death with Zeth. It was helping her work out all her seething emotions. A blade aimed at a gap in Zeth's armor made its way into his body tissue. At the same time as this dance-like blade strike, a bullet from close range smashed through Zeth's compound eye. Bit by bit, the battle was tilting in Carrera's favor. Ha ha ha. This is so fun. Tisk. A demon like you, with all these little tricks. You're pretty good, but not as good as Zijin. What? Zijin's my officially sanctioned rival, but fighting him is nothing like this. We've sometimes fought for days at a time, but I've never managed to inflict a single wound on him. That was the truth. Even without Diablo's nonsensical rules, Zijin's strength was extraordinary. By contrast, Zeth was hardly weak, but Carrera had landed repeated attacks on him. If they kept fighting like this, Carrera was convinced she'd win. So what? Zeth asked. What I'm saying is you're weaker than him. Ha. Then let me show you everything I can do. Carrera's words were more than enough to hurt Zeth's pride. Converting his anger into energy, Zeth focused all his murderous rage on Carrera. That look alone could kill anyone ranked below an A. The sheer pressure was so violent it might have fatally wounded even a high-level magic born. But Carrera brushed it off like it was nothing. Then, as if to pay him back, she drummed up her own magic force, working her aura up before sending it Szeth's way. The twin auras collided, forming a gigantic vortex over the battlefield. Anyone who touched it was caught up in the intense waves of magic force, at the cost of their life. The Milim forces were aware of this danger, which was why none of Carrera's allies were near her. They were all fine, but since there were still swarms of insectors covering the battlefield, this whirlpool in the air did a lot to whittle down their numbers. Szeth took a step forward. Carrera confronted him. His fist tore into Carrera's cheek, just as her sword sliced through a gap in his exoskeleton. Szeth executed a kick that'd kill a high-ranked magic pawn in one blow. Carrera, unfazed, thrust her golden gun into his chest and fired away. The bullet, fired at point-blank range, gouged its way through Szeth's exoskeleton, creating a hole, but then Szeth's kick, which looked like it had missed, swung back down at Carrera's head. HNGH. She noticed it in the nick of time, just barely covering her head. But that wasn't enough, and she took the blow on her shoulder instead. "Almost had you," Szeth said. "Look at me, making a mistake. How embarrassing." Carrera's left shoulder was shattered, but that intrepid smile was still on her lips. She had hoped to defeat him without taking any damage, so this was a disappointment for her, but she still didn't think she'd lose. After several hours of fighting, Carrera recognized all of Szeth's habits. But even so, Szeth's power was the real deal. If Carrera wasn't careful, she'd be the loser. It was up to her to gradually pile on the damage and ensure her own victory. So she stared Szeth down with her sneering, imposing look. Her military uniform was torn at the shoulder, revealing the snow-white skin below. The blood had already stopped, and she was completely healed, like she had never been hurt in the first place. The same was true of Szeth. Everything Carrera did to him had healed as well. For transcendent beings like the two of them, non-lethal damage was pretty meaningless. What counted in battle was how efficiently you could exhaust your opponent. Any side who let fatigue slow them down was at a major disadvantage. Carrera had started this fight with a large-scale move, which meant her stamina was lagging behind Szeth's. That was what made her consider a more measured approach. He. I've got a grasp of this guy Szeth's skills now. He's good, but I'm still gonna win, aren't I? The way she saw it, there was no need to overexert herself any longer. But despite how assured she was about her victory, she suddenly began to notice a change in the atmosphere. Huh? This presence, what is it? Lady Milim was looking out for something like this, so I let her keep an eye out, but Carrera had been fighting so freely because she knew Milim was still on standby. That was why she was late to notice, or maybe that wasn't the only reason. Another was that Szeth was so powerful, Carrera didn't really have the free time to worry about her surroundings, a situation he had intentionally created. Heh. So you noticed? He remarked. Yes, you are strong. I admit that, but we will be the winners here. This is not a duel. It is war. What? Carrera frowned, displeased. Szeth didn't care. He raised his right hand and pointed in a certain direction. Look, he said. Carrera instead used magic sense to probe the area. Then she learned what Szeth meant. There, before Gobta's eyes, Period had been beautifully transformed. She had always been atypically beautiful to start with, but now anyone who saw her would agree, there was a new, mystical sort of beauty to her. In fact, it wasn't a transformation so much as an evolution. The battle scars Period had accumulated over the battle tore themselves open, revealing a beautiful woman with completely untouched skin underneath. Hello. My name is Period, Queen of the Insects. Even her speech had become smoother. This was clearly something supernatural, not at all the same opponent as before. And no wonder. This Period was the second in command of the Insectors, the Empress who was the true leader controlling the other insect masters. And now that her true nature was revealed, any chance Gobta had at winning was as good as lost. You really gotta stop screwing with me, guys, Gobta muttered. Ranga nodded, no doubt agreeing with him. This goes beyond a mere increase in strength. Us becoming stronger will no longer make any difference, so what are we gonna do? Gupta asked. The question was greeted with silence at first. Ranga was unsure how to answer. We will have to run. She must seem dangerous even to you, does she not, Gupta? Well. Now it was Gupta looking for a response. I mean, yeah, but, if we run away by ourselves, that seems kinda mean to me. Even he knew Ranga was right. Up until then, maybe they had a chance to beat period if they found the right move to make. At this point, the possibility of that was close to zero, such was the overwhelming presence she now had. She called herself queen, and her power was clearly above that of any other insect master. Even Zeth, the chief insectoid general that Guerrera was dealing with, was no match for her. Ranga and Gupta knew what they were dealing with. Defeat would be inevitable like this. But they didn't want to be the only ones to escape. They'd never be able to face their friends like that. They were damned if they did, damned if they didn't, but there was no time to ponder this. Don't give me that crap. Whether you look different or not, it's all the same thing to me. With that cry, Carillion was the first to make a move. This one was Burst Raw, his best special strike. With no regard for the future, he unleashed his ever-changing particle diffusion focusing cannon strike, his body transforming into conscious particles that swarmed period. It all happened in an instant. Period.